What's going on? It's Johnny King. Johnny King on the Johnny King Show, and I'm here with Jason King, my beloved cousin, one of the most interesting men in the world. Yeah, Dos Equis, right?
Yeah. I'll
He's
take it.
yeah, he'll take it. Jason is just a couple months younger than myself, and he really is a very, very interesting cat. I'm so excited to have him on the podcast. And we probably won't even have enough time to talk about everything we want to talk about, because I want to talk about feminism, fashion, racial justice, alien sightings, misogyny, mushrooms, childhood shenanigans, all the above, because we've got plenty we could talk about probably for hours. But
Yeah, quite the
yeah,
handbag.
yeah, it's good. It's good. It's all the things. So you are located. Tell the people, where are you at?
Yeah, I'm currently in my tiny house up in Seattle. Been here about 20 years, almost 20 years now.
In the tiny house for 20 years.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
not 20, not the tiny house, but been in Seattle for almost 20 years now since we graduated college,
Yep.
and yeah, been living up here, loving it. Pacific Northwest is a tough place to leave, man. I've tried a couple of times, and you just keep coming back. It's too
Yeah.
gorgeous to leave.
What do you
So.
what do you yeah, what do you love about it?
I mean, you drive 20 minutes in any direction other than south, but drive 20 minutes in any direction, you're either at the ocean or in the mountains, and so everything's super accessible. The city itself has changed a ton since I moved in. Oh god damn it, I'm sorry.
It's all good. That's how we roll.
Yeah, the city itself has changed a ton since I moved here, but still has kind of maintained a lot of aspects that I initially loved about it. I'd never been here when I moved out. I'd never visited and just fell in love with it immediately. So, it's ever since Amazon moved in, it's been a different place. It's a lot more expensive than it used to be and all that, but it's an amazing community, amazing place. I love
Yeah.
it
Kind of crazy how something like that can shift the whole, you know, the whole
entirely.
environment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have a ton of friends, a ton of college student friends, and a lot of probably new friends out there over the last 20 years, right?
For sure. Yeah. So I moved out here with Trav, who we grew up with, and then several other friends who I grew up have been out here, have since moved on. But yeah, I have quite a community out here. Although, like I said, with the changing dynamics of this city, a lot of my friends, a lot of my community are service industry, bartenders, musicians,
Mm-hmm.
and so everyone's getting kind of pushed further and further out, so it's a little bit
Mm-hmm.
disparate these days, but yeah, really, it I feel super fortunate. I don't know a ton of people at our age who have like a really vibrant community of people, and some with kids and no kids and artists, musicians. It's really an inspiring group to be around, and yeah, it's kind of unique to just have such a kind of vast community of really talented, creative people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's when I think about character traits about you, that's kind of what it fits into, because you've done a lot of different things over the last 20 years. Tell the listeners a little bit of what you've been into over that time period, and
Man,
even
I've
over the
done
last five
I've done
years.
everything. I mean, I don't know if this is to for good or for ill, but um, I was never one of those dudes who knew exactly who what I wanted to do. I had a pretty firm grasp of who I was, but professionally, I just I've always been envious of those people who have just an immediate sense of who they want to be or what they want
Clarity.
to do, and
Yeah.
that wasn't me. And uh, and so I've spent a lot of time kind of exploring and trying different things. I started out pursuing music. I was an audio engineer, mix engineer. Blew out my right ear, and now I have tinnitus, so that dream kind of died. Service industry, and then I've done the corporate thing. I've done manual labor. I was training to be an arborist. I have owned my own business, a marketing consultancy. yoga instructor, all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until really the last kind of 4 or 5 years that I found what feels to be kind of my niche, or at least, a pathway towards it. And it was totally unlikely too. I had been running my own business, and I moved out to the woods. I had a cabin, A-frame cabin on about 10 acres out in Belfair, which is like an hour and a half. Take a ferry from downtown Seattle to a town called Bremerton, and it's like half an hour outside of there. So I was like out in the sticks. Spent a year there by myself, and just kind of was interested. I knew I was never really all that good at being alone and spending time by myself, but I wanted to be better at it. And so I moved out there kind of with that intention, and that was a pivotal year. It was the best. I mean, I'm dying to get back out to the country someday, but couldn't make a living out there because, well, I was doing what I was doing online, but all I was doing was helping people buy more shit, and it was so unfulfilling. And even though I was making better money than I'd ever made, I couldn't keep doing it.
Yeah.
So I moved back to the city to kind of figure things out, and tried to start a nonprofit. Spent about 2 years doing that, never got it off the ground. And in the aftermath of that, I was still kind of treading water, figuring out what was next. And a friend of mine, or actually someone I didn't know all that well, but someone we went to school with, had moved out here with her husband. They worked at Amazon. They had just had a newborn, and she had intended to be a stay-at-home mom, but realized pretty quickly by about 3 months that she wanted to go back to work. She really missed it in a way that she didn't anticipate. And so she said, "Hey, I know that you're good with kids. Are you interested in just until you figure out what's next, do you want to be the caretaker for our daughter?" And so we met up for coffee. I met the little girl, and she was 3 months old at the time. And it seemed like as good an opportunity as any. And so I was like, yeah, why not for the time being.
Yeah.
And then, day one, it was the best fucking job I ever had. I loved it.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to be a dad. It hasn't been in the cards for me so far, but I've always loved kids, and particularly babies and infants. And I was kind of down and out at the time, and was having a rough go of it. Was feeling kind of depressed, and it was like the most cathartic, most rewarding experience to spend all day, every day with a baby. It was incredible.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of my journey, and since then it's kind of led in a crazy direction. I've now become a birth and postpartum doula, certified childbirth educator. I just got certified as a prenatal yoga instructor. So I've been supporting women and their partners through pregnancy and the aftermath, and bringing baby home and all of that. And since then, I've kind of, in the last few months, I'm shifting, and what I'm finding is that, there are a million resources out there for new moms, and very, very few out there for new dads. And so I'm finding that all this education that I've had and experience in the birth room and supporting pregnant people is coming really in handy. I'm finding that what I'm really kind of moving towards is helping to support dads as they step into fatherhood, helping them support their partners through pregnancy, labor and delivery, newborn care, and just kind of those first few steps into that journey of fatherhood. So I'm excited to see where that goes as well.
Yeah, and it's been interesting just because over the last couple of years with me stepping into the men's stuff as well, the men's work, let's just say, quote unquote, you've been there to say, hey, and support me or challenge me on different things, because a lot of it's been new for me, and kind of using my voice and educating myself, and yet here's another aspect of it that I'm passionate about it too, that I'm not haven't even thought about touching in terms of fatherhood, but I think we have that in common very much so, in terms of wanting to have children, and just the loving being around infants and kids and just having so much fun and that sort of thing, but it's pretty fun to see you stepping into that, which is so needed, because you're right. In so many different ways, men just don't necessarily either reach out, or they don't have the community, or it's just that right perfect storm for a lot of guys feeling like they're on their own.
Totally. Yeah. And and that's kind of beyond just helping individual guys, kind of what I'm looking toward the direction I'm hoping to move is really, like you said, kind of creating community, giving a space for expectant dads and new dads in general, to have a space to talk about like what's coming up, what's challenging, what are their worries and concerns, where they feel like they're coming up short. And so not necessarily me providing all the answers, but just creating a space for dads who are going through the same experience that kind of communicate with one another, hear each other, feel each other, and all that. So
It's pretty powerful, and like I said, very needed. And I think it's just like I said, it's cool space to be getting into, with guys being more and more open to asking for advice or asking for support, listening.
yeah, there's a real yearning for it,
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
Did you see that video the other day? I think your brother Pete posted it, and I posted it as well. But um, there was a dude who, this black dude, dad, who's walking down the street shooting himself, and he's talking about um, kind of the challenge, how excited he is about being. He's got his baby in his hand. He's talking about how excited he is that a lot of other. He's got a vlog. About fatherhood, and he and his partner are raising their daughter, and he's saying that, like, all these guys are hitting him up and saying like, oh, I'm so excited about what you're doing, I'm so excited to be a dad. And he just keeps it so real, and talks about like, yeah, it is the most incredible experience, but it's also like really challenging, and it's so
Sure.
important that that this is really hard work, and the only way to be a good dad is to make sure that you're like taking care of your old traumas, make sure before you become a dad, start tying up some of those loose ends and doing that hard work. And he just hits in a span of like a minute and a half, he just hits like all these really important areas. But
I didn't see that.
I think it speaks to this idea that men in general are, I feel like it's a new day when dads, or men, and particularly men who are becoming fathers, are recognizing that, like, man, for all the good that our dads did, there were so many, that generation, and really all generations beforehand, um, were lacking in a lot of areas as well.
Yeah,
And that there's this momentum for dads to become more, all the work that you're doing,
yeah.
helping men to be, more in touch with their feelings and their emotions, to be vulnerable and lean
Hmm.
on one another, talk through their issues, all these things that, like, our dads had no idea, still have no idea how to do,
Hmm. 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 And I think that's something that we share. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I can speak for myself. I mean, one of the the biggest wound for me was kind of my relationship or lack thereof with my dad growing up.
Mhm.
And our dads being brothers. And the complications in their relationship, how that overflowed and affected us as children. Not only as children, but then our relationships with each other, because you and I were best buds, and then that whole the family dysfunction issues kind of drove us apart in different ways. And it's been interesting to see how just we as adults now have had to challenge ourselves to grow, to heal, and to empathize with varying experiences of our parents, our fathers, right? Our
Yeah,
siblings, the world at large. And it's just kind of interesting to see how we're both kind of doing work that I think interweaves call it the wound, or just the experiences of wanting to make sure that we pass the baton to the next generation better than how we were handed it, if that makes sense.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So it's pretty cool that you're doing what you're doing. I'm excited for you. So
Thank you.
yeah, it's going to be big. Tell me, I mean, if we rewind a little bit, I mean, in terms of feminism, correct me if I'm wrong, you've said that you are a feminist,
For sure.
correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Explain I mean, because I'm really ignorant on a lot of these topics that you and I talk about, because you're so much more well read and educated on a lot of these things. But tell me and those that are listening, like, when you say that you as a dude are a feminist, what does that exactly mean?
um, well, I'll start by saying that I'm a flawed feminist. I think when people say that they're a feminist, a lot of people hear, uh, virtue signaling, or this like attempt to, this like this feigning of righteousness or something like that. And I can say for sure that like I'm a dude and I've made tons of mistakes, and I'm kind of in the midst of this big reckoning in my own life of how I've showed up in the lives of the women in my life, and what those relationships have looked like, the ways in which I have perpetuated systems that disadvantage women, that abuse women, and I've certainly played my part in that. With that said, I've considered myself a feminist since we were 15 or 16. I mean, you probably remember I tortured you and all of our friends. Like, I don't know how or why, but at 15 years old, I started listening to Ani
Anita
DeFranco,
Franco. Yeah. Yeah.
and I still like, her first 10 albums I can cite. I mean, I can recite back verbatim,
Yeah.
and I have no idea why I was so into her, but she was one
Yeah.
of the most like, outspoken, most vocal feminists, and that for whatever reason really appealed to me, and I think was really pivotal in kind of helping me recognize that like the system is, it's a lot of the things that we have been in the kind of zeitgeist today, but with regard to race, but the same ideas exist, or the same ideas exist when it comes to sexism, misogyny, etc. Just this idea of patriarchy. It's not an idea. This structure of patriarchy, wherein white males are at the top, and anybody who isn't in that category of straight, and not just white males, but straight white males, anybody who falls outside of that is disadvantaged to some degree or another. And so I'm an empathetic dude. I've always been kind of a sensitive and empathetic guy. And so I have been really cognizant of that since a young guy. And the more that I have learned, the more I've leaned into it, the more kind of glaringly I see these places. And you and I both have gone through like MITT, went to transformational training. I mean, it was a real eye opener for me. Blew my mind really, and broke my heart. But if you remember, there's a point where at the first day, they invited anybody who had been sexually abused or sexually harassed to stand up, and this is a room of 200 people.
Yeah.
And more than half of the people stood up. Most of 90% of them women. But it was incredible to me that like more than half of the women in there, like way more than half of the women in there, stood up.
Yeah.
And so these are the sorts of things that like I'm aware of, how we raise our daughters to be on alert about this. Don't walk around by yourself late at night, and don't wear clothes that are too revealing, and all these things. And just being cognizant of the fact that so many women in my life have articulated that like, yeah, they have an ingrained fear of men, and that is problematic. And so that's been a big part of why I'm doing the work that I'm doing, is because I feel like in the same way that racism is not Black people's problem, or the problem of people of color, it's white people's problem to solve. And the same thing, in my opinion, is true of misogyny and sexism. It's like this is our problem, not theirs, and so we got to start at the root.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a
Yeah.
lot of work to be done. And I remember I was at a workshop too, a different one than MITT, but the crowd was asked, and there's thousands of people there, like how many of you, and just asking men, how many of you have felt, you know, unsafe, or your life was in danger within the last year? Maybe 50% of men raise their hands, and like, how about in the last month? There's like one, two,
Mm-hmm.
last week, not a single hand, right? And then of course he does it with the women, and the number of hands that were raised still that felt unsafe within the last 24 hours was staggering, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was the first time, and that's what it really is I think for me, it's just coming to an awareness of all these conversations, topics, things that I just, again, privileged in one way or another, just being who I am, a white male, so unaware of it, and you were 25 years, ahead of me, at least in terms of like, I'm just getting aware of this in like probably say the last 5 years, if not last 3 years, in terms of just various conversations. And of course, all the stuff going on with George Floyd and all the protesting. It's like, just finally and this stuff is not new.
Right.
It's just interesting how it's like how we choose or whatever the word is to finally awaken to the shits that's been going on kind of below the radar, or not below the radar, very much in front of us, but turning a blind eye to it for a lifetime until all of a sudden something clicks.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and I do remember you being all into Ani DeFranco, and I think you even, for one of my birthdays, you gave me one of her CDs, and I like I really listened to it, like wanting to like it, and I was like, I don't know if she's my, but I also remember that there's a big part of it having to do with feminism that I didn't even get, and
Mhm.
could have easily asked you, but it wasn't even like something I could have even, I don't know, I wasn't even there ready to explore it. It was just high
Yeah.
school,
Yeah.
girlfriends, sports, like
Yeah. We
normal
had other things
stuff.
going on,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So, um, what can I say? But that's really, really cool. And it's just interesting to see how those things from your childhood or teenagehood, whatever, is all kind of tied into, built upon into where you're at now. But now you're working with men in much the same way that, I mean, just because there's so much need of progress and evolution that men need to make, I think,
Yeah.
all men of all colors and races, of course, but especially white straight guys.
For sure. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Well, because like you said, when we rec- when we recognize, I think the assumption, until we allow ourselves to challenge our own assumptions, we believe that, or we want to believe that everybody walks through the world with an experience that looks and feels like ours, and it's hard to make that leap, to
Mm-hmm.
finally recognize, like, oh, the fact that I don't remember the last time I didn't feel safe walking down the street, or I know exactly what to do. There are very few things I need to do in order to walk in any place in the, in this country, certainly, wherein I can feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
That is just not the experience of most people. And
Mm-hmm.
but allowing that, I think we're seeing that, in the world, and in this moment of the protests and everything, we're seeing this resistance to even allowing ourselves to see, like, this is plain as day, right? Like, there are all kinds of efforts to, like, to cherry pick statistics, to, like, counteract arguments about systemic racism, and there's this back and forth, when in reality, like, if people just took a step back, there's no denying what our eyes see. Like, we can see with our own eyes that things are not equal, and that they never have been, and that people walk around in this world without um, the privilege of feeling safe no matter where they go, and that is something that everybody should feel. And the fact that they don't is a problem. And if we don't take it upon ourselves, we've seen this for generations now, and Black leaders have been saying for generations, if until white people, like the moderate, middle of the road white person, decides to make this a priority, it's not going to go away, because again, it's our problem, not theirs. They're the
Mm-hmm.
recipients of it.
Mm-hmm. Right. When I guess I've said this on a podcast, but also in several conversations with some of my buddies here in Denver that are black, and I was like, man, if it weren't for you, I probably wouldn't care. I wouldn't care because it's a faceless entity. It's just black people, you know.
Hmm.
And I'm like, and up to this point, I haven't had a ton of black friends, just living in West County, St. Louis, and even Denver is pretty darn white. Um, but now with several really good buddies that are black, I'm like, I actually have a name, a face, a personality, a love, an appreciation for you as a brother that's so much deeper than just, your skin color, that this has now given me more reason to learn, to educate myself, and to change things and to have these conversations. But it just goes to show that, like, that I think I'm no different in the sense of, like, how people are as it relates to human behavior, that like they're not going to change unless they have a real personal reason to change. And so how do you go about getting, like you said, that middle of the road white male or white people in general to shift when maybe they don't have a whole lot of black friends, they live in white neighborhoods, they don't have a whole lot, like it's just more the same. And then I get a lot of people commenting to me, like trying to rationalize why all lives matter. And let's look at the conservative side of things. I'm like, I'm not trying to make a political statement here. I'm just trying to say, like, we're all human beings. Like, should to your point, shouldn't we all feel equality and safety? And like, isn't that what we're moving towards? But then they're trying to push back on me. I just get confused with like, why don't,
Where's
like,
the where's the resistance? Why is there resistance to this idea?
yeah,
Like I
yeah,
said, like we can see with our own eyes that the experience is not the same.
right,
And so you can you can find statistics to kind of back whatever your belief is. But again,
totally,
if we stand back and just are honest with ourselves, the experience is not the same, and that's not okay.
right,
As to what we can do about it, I mean, to be honest, I I don't have answers for that. I wish that I did, and I'm certainly seeking them, and I'm starting with myself and
yeah,
continuing to learn and unlearn and read what I can and challenge my own experience and my own beliefs, have difficult conversations with people in my life.
mm,
Um, but in the end, that's not enough. I think that there needs to be uh, action beyond ourselves, and so I'm still kind of navigating that myself and figuring out where my place lies. I do think that, like, speaking to what you were saying, it unfortunately, like, not everybody has the same degree, just same degree of empathy and compassion. Like,
mm-hmm,
chemically, biologically, we aren't all wired the same way. I happen to be like super on this end of the spectrum. I'm just like, to a fault, empathetic. But I recognize that not everybody is that way. And so I know that there are, like you said, it takes like having people in your life or really putting a name and a face to it to start to internalize some of that emotional connection.
mm-hmm,
And so what I'm hoping to do with my project is to start sharing stories. I've been kind of mapping this out, but going in and interviewing and doing kind of a program where we go in to the homes of different dads in all kinds of different environments, and every black dads, white, Asian, um, low income dads who are foster dads, adoptive dads, raising kids who are LGBTQ, or
mm-hmm,
dads who are LGBTQ,
mm-hmm,
raising straight kids. There's all these different angles,
mm-hmm,
and I think the more that we can, like, uh, normalize the experience of people who don't look and act like us, the more we can empathize, the more that we can see their humanity,
mm,
because it's no secret that that a lot of the places, a lot of the regions that have the most problems with racism and homophobia are places that have very few opportunities for well, that's actually not true. um, yeah, so I think that what we can see pretty consistently is that a lot of people who are homophobic or who are racist have very little direct interaction with the people who are the recipients of their
mm-hmm,
hatred,
mm-hmm,
and so yeah, that's where I'm starting. I think storytelling is extremely important,
yeah, amen,
and so I think beyond just like picking people's brains about how they think, but really going in and getting a snapshot of their life and showing what it looks like to navigate the world as a, you know, as a dad who's raising a young Black boy. Like that they have challenges that we could never dream of.
Yeah.
We have to have conversations we don't have to have.
Mm.
Any dad who's raising a preteen girl, like, is having to have conversations that we shouldn't be having to have, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um so I think, yeah, I think I'm excited about bringing humanity through storytelling, about people who aren't necessarily in the spotlight all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Remind me when you get off the podcast to put you in touch with one of my buddies who's Hispanic. He's gay. He's adopted several children, and he's just taken in adopting a transgender teenager. And he and I just chatted the other day with how like he's loving it, and yet talk about a freaking challenge. I'm like, oh man.
Absolutely
Yeah, so
unreal.
he might be a good guy to chat about. Yeah, he's a really good guy. But besides that, I think I, it is. I mean, whether we're talking about race or we're talking about like it just again, it's human behavior that I'm not all that passionate about a cause like curing Alzheimer's or breast cancer until it actually affects me, right?
Right.
Then
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh shit, this took my mom, so now I'm a lot more passionate about breast cancer or something like that, right? And so it makes sense, but it's like, okay, how do you actually generate the leverage on those that maybe it's not all that applicable, because we have to get more of a groundswell if we want change. Otherwise, it's not going to happen, you know.
Totally. Yeah.
So, and I think for me, it's just having the conversations without ostracizing people, without necessarily saying like, I'm not wanting to make people right or wrong. I'm just wanting to have healthy conversations, even for my own benefit, to grow. Because I'm a big part of call it the problem, or just I'm not going to even put blame, other than just like it's been my own kind of lack of education and
Mm-hmm.
naivete that has driven a lot of what we're seeing and perpetuates it. So if it's going to change, like you said, it's got to at least first start with change here. So if you're listening to this or watching this on the podcast, like, what can you do, to educate yourself a little bit? Jason put me in touch, and I've mentioned on previous podcasts in terms of just what's going on in the world right now with all the protests. Like to watch the documentary called 13th, and then the most recent one, I'm Not Your Negro. Like there's so many good things out there that to me kind of opened my eyes to, oh gosh, like conversations, topics, education that I was not even aware of, right? So
Totally.
a lot of good resources out there, a lot of good books, a lot of good podcasts. You've got so much good stuff that I feel like you're constantly on the front lines, if you will, to educate yourself, which is pretty cool.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. I I think that, um, that there's a that something I've read a couple of times recently, from different Black leaders, is that, like, this idea of it really, their concern is not whether you consider yourself racist or not. Their concern is whether or not you call yourself an anti-racist. We were all, in terms of in this conversation about blame, I think that there are a lot of people out there who are feeling like, whoa, I wasn't a slave owner. I didn't do this, or, I'm not doing anything to perpetuate this. Not recognizing that we all have our own biases, that are implicit, that we were raised in a society that has these elements.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's not important whether or not we consider ourselves racist or not. What's important is whether we consider ourselves anti-racist, which is an action, right? We've all been raised in this society, and what's important is that we take responsibility to see where it lives in ourselves, and to what degree, and what can we do to dismantle and unlearn that. Like, that's the important part. I don't give a fuck if about calling somebody racist. Like,
Right.
I don't care about that. What I care about is like, are you taking responsibility for yourself to find an answer, or some catharsis or some healing in yourself and your community, and it'll grow from, the hope is, and the expectation is that it will grow from there. And I think we are seeing that. This is a profound moment in time when enough people are getting on board and educating themselves. And again, that's not enough, but I think it will lead in the right direction.
Yeah, it's a start at least, correct. And
Yeah.
I think I've thought those things too. Just feeling this guilt. I'm like, why do I feel white man guilt? And
Mhm.
then to think the same thing of like, well, I mean, aren't we so far beyond slavery? And I wasn't, like what the hell? And then when you really look at like, no, we've inherited a system that was founded in, by a bunch of, you know, individuals in a time that's so different than it is now, but it's still the foundation on which we kind of
Yeah,
operate our
we,
society.
you and I have talked before about like if we look at our own lives, we can see that trauma is generational, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know that our dads, who are brothers, were
Mm-hmm.
raised by our grandfather. I interviewed my dad a couple years ago about just childhood, growing up in
Mm-hmm.
the 50s, and particularly his relationship with our grandfather. And what I found most striking was that, I kept, my dad and I are so different. My dad is such a like very typical Midwestern conservative businessman, of
Mm-hmm.
which none of that resonates for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I have always yearned to like have a more emotional connection and to really like understand my dad,
Yeah.
and to understand one another. And that's proven really, really difficult. And I've been resentful of my dad for that for a long time. And it wasn't until this conversation with him about his dad when I realized like it's not in my dad's DNA in the way that it is mine. Like it's just a natural thing for me to want to talk about feelings and emotions. My dad isn't wired that way. And he was never given the tools from his parents, and particularly from his dad. Every conversation that we had, and I kept digging, like, I want to hear more about your emotional relationship with your dad. And the only thing that he kept coming back to was, well, he was such an amazing worker. He really taught us how to work. He really taught us how to make a living. He really taught us how the value of a work ethic. And every conversation came back to that. And he's like, I kept asking and asking. And eventually I was like, Dad, like, I don't know if you're hearing me. I want to know about, what was your emotional connection with him? And he was like, I don't know what you're looking for. Like, there's not much to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
He taught us how to work.
Yeah.
And which isn't to totally dilute the relationship down to that one element, but it's to say that like resoundingly, what my dad took away from their relationship
Mm.
was that. And so uh, that has had effects. Like I think that directly affected the fallout that your dad and my dad had, is
Mm-hmm.
that everything was defined by work and power and prestige and
Mm-hmm.
money.
Mm-hmm.
And now you and I are dealing with the ramifications of that 2 generations later,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we take it to a personal level and examine in our own lives intergenerational trauma, and recognize how the experience of our grandparents influenced our parents, and how that has influenced who we are
Mm-hmm.
and what we're railing against
If that's
or
possible. Yeah.
learning from, then we can put that on a grander scale and recognize that, like, for a country that was established on these principles, with these institutions, it's not
Mm-hmm.
surprising that we're still seeing a lot of detritus and a lot of like decay and toxicity
Mm-hmm.
that hasn't been cleansed from the system. Like that's pretty easy to see,
Yeah. 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 Well, and I think about too in terms of just going making the connection between our experience and what we're seeing in the country. It's like, I too kind of used to resent my dad for just not really being around much. just being a workaholic. And yet I also see it as, now I kind of see it as a way that I can effectively blame him or give gratitude, because in some sense I can take the good for the good, but I was so much raised by my mom. And I think you and I both are, I just don't know if I would be as empathetic or as well rounded in different ways if it weren't for the fact that I really didn't have to, or if I had to go and unlearn a lot of character traits that my dad passed on from
Yeah.
our grandfather, you know. And I don't know, I can't remember if it was our nana or back as parents, but I know there was alcoholism, a lot of abuse there as well. So it's just substance abuse. And, you know, we know that our grandparent, at least, you know, your dad and my dad's father used to get into fist fights with their oldest uncle. And it's like, dude, that, I didn't experience a whole lot. You know, you might have that little bit of that in your childhood, but it's like, thank God I was protected from some of that, to where I get to choose who I am and what masculinity looks like for me, just for me, right? And then do what I can to better the future generations in that sense, in the same way that, like, okay, I've taken that responsibility to heal myself, and then let's look at the grander system and
Right.
the culture that we live in, the society that we live in, which I think is more the work that I'm doing now, right?
Totally.
So
Yeah.
as I continue to heal,
Hmm.
because I think that never necessarily ends. So
Right. No.
yeah, all really valuable points though. Um, and I think it's things that, again, if you're just listening to this and you just want to get started, it can be very overwhelming. It can be very overwhelming to look back on your life and to look at all, you know, think about trying to heal the broken parts within you, let's just say. Um, but even more so, like, systemically as a nation, can be like, well, where do we freaking start? It has to start with you, you know, with you as an individual, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Recognizing the places where you're broken or where you're challenged, and doing the best that you can to heal that. And I hate to continue coming back to, because not certainly not everybody will um, ever have that journey of parenthood, but many of us will. And I think that, you know, I've been thinking a lot about how, like, I think there's a lot of value, and it's super important that we work to, like, dismantle the and examine the toxicity of these structures, whether
Yeah.
it's racism, patriarchy, etc., and think about dismantling them from the top down.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I think we'll be exponentially more successful by working from the bottom up, by raising new generations with as little of that trauma as possible. And so that starts with healing ourselves, so that we
Totally.
aren't, you know, just what, like you were saying, you didn't have that in your household, and so it's less likely that your kids will have that either.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we're going through and recognizing that, like, we're not healing solely for our own good, it's not a purely selfish motive, but
Mm-hmm.
that it is passed down from generation to generation, and it resonates out into our immediate friends and family and our broader communities as well.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Well, shifting gears
Yeah.
entirely,
Yeah.
what would, because we could talk about that for another hour, I'm sure, or two, but what would be one of your more fun memories of our shenanigans over the years? If you think
Oh,
about our
God.
childhood, or
Yeah.
does one ever
Um,
come to mind?
yeah, for sure. Uh, I I just remember a ton of, like, um, I mean, I remember going over to, like, having sleepovers when we were like 10, 11, 12 years old, and, like, sneaking out of the house and just, like, I would say that maybe, like, Halloween, you know, we, like, that was, had very little to do with trick or treating and everything to do with just, like, being allowed to be out at night, just running wild, you know. There was such a freedom in that. And, like,
Yeah.
we just raised hell, and we didn't
Yeah.
do anything bad, but just fucking around. And
Yeah.
there was something so liberating about that, about just, like, being allowed to be out at night running around doing whatever we wanted.
Was it, what wasn't it you? I believe it was you who thought you were gonna during Halloween one year that you're gonna try to leap over that
Tree.
that tree,
Yes. Yeah.
like a 6 foot, evergreen tree.
Yeah.
In
Like a baby tree just getting off the ground, and
yeah, I don't
snap
know
that fucker
exactly.
in half.
You literally just took the top right off. I don't know exactly what you were thinking of how you're gonna
Oh,
leap over that thing, but
no, I don't.
it was a good effort. It was a good
Thank you.
effort. In one of my previous podcasts, I just talked about me telling the story of us trick or treating in your old neighborhood, and I was telling the whole class during art class how we were trick or treating and just getting all the candy from the condoms. We were going from condom to condom to condom, and how the teacher was like, "Wait, what are you talking about? You mean
Yeah.
condos?" I'm like, "Yeah, condominiums." Oh man, I remember too, just walking around outside at your old place and like finding frogs everywhere and just chucking them up in the air and letting them bounce off the pavement. I don't know what was so great about that, killing frogs.
I
Horrible.
mean, yeah, just yeah, yeah, just for no reason, just throwing frogs as high in the air as we could and watching them. And I remember then picking them up off the ground and putting them in people's mailboxes. So they just like,
Yeah. We
what?
were little. We were little
What the fuck
hooligans.
is that all about?
I don't know. What? Yeah, I don't know what we were expressing at time in our age, but
Yeah,
not the greatest. I guess we could be certainly doing worse, but
yeah,
putting fireworks down in the in the sewer drains, and
yeah,
we'd have a lot of firework wars, right?
yeah,
That was
yeah,
fun too.
yeah.
Roman
Yeah.
candles
I
and
don't think it's. I saw a meme the other day that was something about like I forget exactly what it was, but it was referencing the fact that like, and we hear it even more from like kids that grew up in the 70s, but growing up in the 80s and particularly in the 90s, like parents would leave us home alone all the time,
hmm
and kids just aren't left home alone anymore from what I can gather. I'm not a parent, so I don't know. I don't know at what age, but I remember like we were staying home alone when we were like 9, it was like,
yeah,
yeah, all the time.
yeah,
And that's just not something that they do anymore. And
yeah, yeah. It is kind of interesting. And what would I do? I just either play video games or watch TV or go shoot some baskets or play in the
totally.
woods. It's like it wasn't a whole lot we could really get into otherwise, I guess. But
Yeah.
well, recently I had uh, my buddy Sean in town, and I asked him, I was like, "Hey man, do you believe in aliens?" He's like, I believe in the idea that we're not alone, but I don't believe that we've been visited by aliens." I was like, "All right, you got to watch this Bob Lazar Area 51 and Flying Saucers documentary on Netflix." So he watched it and he was mind blown.
I
Bob
haven't seen it.
Lazar. Oh, dude, you got to see it. Bob Lazar is a super smart, like rocket scientist
Mhm.
who worked at Los Alamos. He also worked in S4, which is like an area of Area 51, and he was brought in to work on the propulsion technology that they were finding in. They had 9 different UFOs. The government, right?
What?
This is back 30 years ago, right?
Okay. All right.
So ultimately, he's talking about this anti-gravity um, and or antimatter reactor that creates it manipulates gravity. So the more you get into it, the more he talks about how we have. He's like he likens it to if we were to go back 200 300 years ago and drop off a motorcycle, right, with
Hmm.
the key in it.
Yeah.
There'd be enough poking and prodding till they probably could figure out how to turn on the motorcycle
Yeah.
and actually ride it.
Yeah.
But would they be able to create a fender, fix the brakes,
Right.
do anything? No, they didn't have the technology.
Yeah.
That they had learned at that point 30 years ago how to fly UFOs. So we had Navy or Air Force pilots driving around, flying around UFOs. And what they were
What?
attempting to, yes, it's crazy. You got to watch it, right? You're going to think I'm crazy until you
I
listen to
do.
Joe Rogan's podcast
Yeah.
of him and Bob Lazar. It totally adds up,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And then to watch another documentary called Acknowledged. Um, it's a really really fascinating one where more or less it talks about how we are 100 years behind in technology from where we could be because of the alien technology that we found in the 1920s and 30s when the first UFOs were found and apparently dug up, because I think they were found in like archaeological digs, which is crazy.
Really? What?
But then the government and all of the richest of the rich families across the world, oil companies, and you know how there's just like 12 families that own
Yeah.
GE and
All of
Johnson Johnson, all the, yeah, own the world.
Mm-hmm.
They have suppressed all of this information because it keeps them in power. Because if we were to actually, like, the idea is that we actually have the technology to be to offer free power across the world with no coal, no issues to the to the environment. Like, it's mind-boggling when you actually start to think about it. But the reason why they've suppressed it, and they've killed people to suppress it, because they even showed like 30 years ago, again, 40 years ago, there was a guy that came out that had a car that effectively ran off of water. And the government kind of kiboshed it.
Yeah.
Because of power and everything else. They want, I don't know, it's a crazy ass documentary. I won't go into too much of it. But I bring it up just because I was telling Sean about, our experience. And I want to ask some of the other guys that were there, because people are like, oh yeah, you believe in UFOs. Have you ever seen one? I'm like, yeah, I think I have, and we talked over Christmas,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, totally.
Recount, just for those that are listening, recount your experience of what you and I saw. Cause I don't know how old we were, 10?
Yeah. Yeah.
9, 10, 11?
And I think we were younger because we were still because Pete, my recollection of it was that Josh and Pete were there as well, which would have meant that we were like 7. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So, at summer camp, I've got 2 stories for you. I don't remember if I told you the other one. But so the first one, the one you're referring to, so we were at summer camp, camping out under the stars. We didn't use tents or anything. We just sleeping bag, which in the Midwest is terrible because you wake up and everything's just soaking fucking wet.
It's soaking wet and there's mosquitoes. Yeah. Horrible. Yeah.
But nonetheless, we're all laying there and we're under the stars and all of us cousins and friends everywhere. So we're just staying up, just getting slap happy and joking around and shit. And I think Pete, your brother Pete, was like, "What is that?" And we end up all looking up, and I remember that there was this something flying in the air that had 3 lights in like a triangular shape, and it would fly, but instead of like turning like a normal craft would do, it was like just shifting. It was just like
at right angles.
Yeah. Yep. It was
without changing speed.
Without changing speed. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
And all of us were kind of terrified by it. It was like our minds couldn't and still can't wrap around what the fuck that was. So that was my first one. But have I told you about Hart and I when we were still at the same camp? I don't know if I told you this.
You told me this over Christmas.
I did.
You only told me 6 months ago.
Yeah.
But tell that one again.
So this was when we were 18 and we're counselors, and same night we were doing like cabin cookout night, and he had the youngest cabin, I had the second youngest cabin. We were best buddies, so we like took our cabins to the same spot. Well, we got walkie-talkie came in, and the lodge, the headquarters, walkie-talkied us, and they're like, "Hey, there's a storm coming in. We got to go back to the cabins. Bring all your campers back to the cabins. No camping out tonight." And so Hart and I were in charge of our cabin, so we told the younger counselors to take all the kids back, more or less just to give Hart and I time to fuck off and not be with kids.
Yeah.
And so we're like putting out the fire, and we're just kind of like biding our time and enjoying being alone and quiet.
Yeah.
And we're down in the middle of this gully because this was when they were making that huge lake, but they hadn't put water into it yet. So it's this huge bowl. And I'm sitting on a milk crate, and we just put out the fire, and it's dusk, like the sun is just going down. And something catches my eye off in the distance, and it's this like glowing light. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? And it comes down the hill, and it's coming right at us. And I swear to God, every time I tell this story, the hair on my arms stands up. Yeah. This thing comes down and comes within 15 feet of us. And it looks like a human-like form, but it's like taller and super slender. And it's this like glowing white light, but it looked like I said, it looks like the shape of a man running, but it's like 5 feet off the ground,
Hmm.
and its legs are moving like it's like at a casual jog, but it's flying, like
Yeah.
it's cruising, and it comes down. Fuck my arms! It goes right past us, and out, and up and over, out of sight, goes up the other side of this crater, and it goes out of sight.
Hmm.
And I watched the whole thing, and I turned to Hart, and he's pale white with his jaw dropped, um, totally confirming. I was like, "Did you just fucking see that?" And he's
Yeah.
like, "Yeah." And we like grabbed our shit and ran back to the cabin. It was crazy, but I still like, to those two things combined. Like, I have no way to explain either one of those.
That's yeah. It is truly out of this world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've not experienced that. I do remember the owner of that camp telling me, and I don't know if you were there too, is a father son Boy Scout trip, and we were all in the same tent, maybe like four of us, uh, fathers and sons. And I remember him telling us about how he and his friend were walking home when they were little kids, like our age, and
Mm-hmm.
they came, and all of a sudden there was just this UFO that was like hovering just above the trees, totally quiet,
Yeah.
tons of
Yeah.
lights, and they were just like, "What the?" And then the thing just went, whew, just flew off in a heartbeat, and they were so scared they just ran home as fast as they could, you
Yeah.
know. So that was the first thing that I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." Like that made me think that maybe that's real. But my experience of that first story you had was, yeah, very similar. I don't remember my brother being there per se. I just remember like I was laying next to you, I think, and I don't know if that was me talking to you, but I remember thinking, I remember saying to you like, "Do you see what I see?"
Yeah.
And you were like, "Yep." And we were just kind of laying on our sleeping bags, looking up at the sky and watching these three red dots just kind of move around the sky at right angles, not going any faster or slower. And because there's, but I think at that point we were all supposed to be quiet,
Yeah.
because it's supposed to be sleep time. So then there started to be like murmurings, and people were like, some kids starting to get upset, maybe a little crying, because people were all watching this because we're all laying on our backs, like looking up at the stars, you
Totally.
know.
Yeah.
And I remember the counselors being like, "Hey, it's okay, guys. It's there's an Air Force base nearby. I'm sure there's just something that they're testing." But
Uh-huh.
that they must have been like, "What the hell is that?"
Yeah.
Because we're
Totally.
7 and 8 year olds, and we can make enough sense of it. Be like,
Yeah.
that's not a normal thing to see in the sky. The way
Yeah.
that it was moving and how fast. And I just remember thinking the lights were they were so far up in the sky,
Mm-hmm.
but the amount of speed that they were moving across the sky, like if you see a jet that's at, you know 38,000 feet where it normally cruises, it takes a while to get
Yeah.
across the night sky, right?
100%. Yeah.
Obviously the lower it is, the faster it would go by. But those three lights were so far up there, but the rate of speed that they were moving across the sky, when it
Mm-hmm.
finally went, just went off into
Yeah.
the distance, I was like, what? I remember not being able to sleep for like hours. I was like, what
Yeah.
the hell was that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Mind
crazy.
blowing. It really is. Yeah.
You got to watch the Bob Lazar. I'll
Yeah.
send it
What's
to
it
you, but
called again?
it's
Yeah. Send.
Bob Lazar. Yeah, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. It's on Netflix, and it's yeah, it has a little bit of a cheesy narration to it, but other than that, it's pretty crazy. So
Yeah.
if you don't believe in UFOs, or you don't want to believe in UFOs, don't watch it, because it'll pretty much convince you
Yeah.
that
When
the
I think the
government is.
Ozarks where camp was, I think the Ozarks, if I'm not mistaken, there's like, it's the second most frequent UFO sightings in the nation. The other is
Mm,
like Roswell, somewhere in
mm,
Texas.
mhm.
But I think Ozarks, like, it is second most UFO
Yeah.
sightings in the nation.
I think they talk about in the documentary that like the majority of all of the sightings are along some parallel, some longitude or latitude around the
Interesting.
world, and they all show up primarily around the same area of the globe, right?
That
Yeah,
shit trips me out. I love it.
it's really trippy. But even in the podcast of Joe Rogan and Bob Lazar, he talks about that Bob Lazar saw bodies, alien bodies that they had. that were dead and frozen. So, and not only that, but you should just look at Joe Rogan's stuff. The Pentagon has been releasing more and more. It's probably 5 years ago that the Navy released all of their footage of unidentified flying objects. So, by jets and jets following these UFOs and interactions with normal flights, commercial flights. There's so much stuff out there that they're kind of declassifying a lot of stuff to prove that we not only know about this, but we've had interaction with aliens. And but the technology is where it's mind-boggling, because it would change our society in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Because he said the majority of the cost of everything, this entire house and everything, is all in the cost of the transportation or the production of the goods.
Right.
It's all about burning coal, whatever it is, natural gas. And if we actually had a technology like they do, because he's like, this, what Bob Lazar talks about is this reactor that's in this UFO, it doesn't emit any heat. He's like, anything, even like the whatever, like anything that we have, like this computer, everything, I can feel it right now. It's hot, right?
Yeah.
It emits heat because it's creating. He's like, this technology is beyond us. It's ridiculous. And he's like, the technology that they have would be absolutely game changing for us.
Yeah. That's wild.
So
that's wild.
Yeah.
I need to watch it, because I to a certain extent I'm a rationalist, and like, especially with all these like unbelievable amount of conspiracy theories all the time, but particularly right now. I have a hard time reckoning some of that, but also like seeing those things that I saw lends credence to these, to their existence at the very least. And
for sure. Not only, they actually know where these UFOs have come from.
Yeah.
They know the actual star. Yeah. In a dual star. Yeah. That's what's trippy to me too. Like, they actually know, supposedly.
Yeah.
Where there's like 8 or 9 different planets within however many that could very easily sustain life,
No shit.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Right. Well, I know what I'm watching tonight.
Yeah, check it out. It's really good. I'll send you some other ones. See, you helped me with like educating myself about race and misogyny, and I help you with aliens and Bigfoot. It's a perfect.
Well, no, I told you this before, and I'll reiterate it, but like I really appreciate it. These are things that I've been exploring in myself for a long time. But it doesn't fucking matter how long. It just matters that we're doing it. And I really appreciate your. I think I told you, like, I hadn't listened to any of your podcast episodes, and the first one I listened to was your first conversation on race, and I told you, like, the first half hour or so, I was just like cringing, just like, oh my goodness. I was having a really hard time with it, which is, certainly, like, I need to keep my own righteousness in check a lot, and I will readily admit that. But I really am humbled by and admire your willingness to, like, you have a very, like, earnest yearning to learn and confront your own thoughts and feelings and prejudices and all these things. And if everybody had such a willingness and such a humble attitude, it takes a lot to, like, do this process alone in private, and to do it in public on camera or on audio, on mic, is another thing entirely. And so I really appreciate what you're doing, and I'm excited to kind of see where it leads. I know from my own experience that, like, it, like you said, it's a lifelong process, and it's a little bit like if you have any musician friends who have like written songs, and they, or just like your journals, you look back at your journals from 10 years ago and you're just like, oh my God,
Yeah,
I can't believe,
yeah, yeah,
the things that I thought, or the things that I said, or the way that I said them.
yeah.
And so the same is true for me now. Like I look back and I think when I was in college, I thought I was like really woke, and I'm, like I said, I'm in the middle of this reckoning right now, where I'm really recognizing so many blind spots that even though I had the information and I knew better, intellectually, I didn't recognize the ways that I had internalized these messages, particularly about masculinity and misogyny. I just didn't recognize that they were showing up in my life, and that I was perpetuating and holding up these structures. And so, every day is a new day, and I think the work you're doing now will only compound.
Yeah.
Um, so I really appreciate, another thing you told me not long ago when we were talking about some of this was just that, um, you're able to, uh, I think that I often turn to like guilt and shame when I'm processing this stuff, um, which isn't productive. I think
Yeah.
it only makes things worse.
Right.
And so that's another thing I really appreciate, is that, and you helped me with that. I think just one sentence. I said something about like, whoa, you don't need to feel guilty or shameful about X, Y, or Z. And you were like, oh, I don't feel guilty. I don't feel guilty about it. I'm just trying to be more aware of it, so I don't do it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that that's such a healthy, and admirable, approach.
Yeah, I appreciate it very, very much. And I think, I mean, I see that. And I remember a lot of guys from high school and college. And I looked at you and a bunch of your friends. It's just like very woke, very intelligent. But I couldn't even have the conversation because I often felt, not so much by you, the other guys that I won't mention, but just felt shamed just because I was not intelligent enough or not woke enough and didn't have the big enough words to use. And that to me frustrates me, because I'm like, I underneath some get like, you're more proving how smart you are and how dumb I am, that I don't even want to have the conversation, right? And so I get a lot of opportunities now these days, and I really only want to have the conversation with those that have the humility and the empathy to know that I'm like, man, I'm just starting off with this conversation, so just like pretend like I don't know anything,
Yeah.
but bear with me. Whereas, and I see a lot of people who are white and then shaming other white people on social media, saying, don't friend me, or you're not going to be my friend if you're not anti-racist. I'm like, man, there's so many people that, like, I just don't feel like that's the best approach to bring people with love into the conversation
Mm-hmm.
versus creating more division. So it takes courage on my part, but also takes a lot of humility and empathy on your part and everyone else who have been doing this. Like, and just Black people in general, like, I've been living this. There's anger there. We've been living this for generations, and now you're just now getting. I'm like, yes, I'm sorry, but it is what it is. Either accept me where I'm at and help me, or you're just not the right person to support me with this conversation. So testament to you too, because you've helped me, and like, like how little I know, probably with some of the faux pas I say, or things that don't totally line up with how that I think, as
Mm-hmm.
I'm still trying to figure this out. And that's kind of the nice thing. And I think about it too in terms of just relationships. Like, if I think about where my relationships were 10 years ago or 20 years, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I said that or I did that. That just goes to show how we evolve. And thank God we can have love for ourselves in forgiving the younger version or less mature version of ourselves. That's
Yeah.
just where I'm like, you know what, like everyone deserves that type of love and understanding as we're having these conversations about anything that I talk
Yeah.
about on the podcast. So I appreciate you for recognizing that too. And I hope this is the first of many conversations about deep things and not so deep things like aliens. And, you know,
Totally.
we can talk about various other journeys, so to speak, in the
Yeah,
future.
yeah, yeah,
So I think that'd
yeah.
be a fun one to get into. So
Yeah, always down for that too. Of
yeah, yeah. But anyways, thank you for taking some time out of your morning and
course,
hanging
but
with me and sharing your stories and love with the world. So if people wanted to connect with you in any which way, what would be one way that they could reach out to you if they wanted to further any of these conversations with you one-on-one?
Um, I am.
You're all over social media. I mean, you're huge on social media. No, he's not.
I you can visit my website, my birth worker website, which is evolvebirth.com.
Cool.
Or the dad's project that I am starting. I literally just made my first post yesterday.
Awesome.
You can find me on Instagram at dad equals.
That equals.
Dad equals.
Awesome. Awesome. And if you're in the Seattle area,
Mm-hmm.
contact Jason because you'll be planning events and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Getting dads, other dads together to talk dad stuff.
Yeah. My hope is, next summer, if the world has stopped burning, I want to have, I want to look out at center field at a Mariners game and see 30 dads out there with babies strapped to their chest and not a mom in sight.
I love it.
Like
I love it. That's awesome. That's awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you again for hanging with me.
Of course, brother.
Appreciate
Yeah,
you, man.
good chat. You
Yeah,
too.
we'll talk soon. See you.
Bye bye.